We did it to Illinois. Strike one. Strike two is New York. And if you are a state not complying with federal law, you're next.
Attorney General Pam Bondi today says New York's so-called green light laws block police agencies from sharing motor vehicle data with the feds on immigration-related matters.
New York has chosen to prioritize illegal aliens over American citizens. It stops today.
So the federal government has sued New York about their sanctuary city law. Let's talk about it. So here is the Department of Justice's lawsuit against New York City officials about their sanctuary city laws. Now, the United States government is suing New York over a particular set of laws called the green light laws. Now, these laws limit federal immigration authorities' access to the state's DMV records. Now, the green light laws were passed in 2019, allowing those here illegally to get driver's licenses from the state.
Now, the New York State Senate gives the green light to the Green Light Bill. This measure gives undocumented immigrants the right to a driver's license. 12 other states already have similar laws in place. CBS 2's Allie Bauman live now in our newsroom with what is next for this bill in New York. Allie?
Well, Christine, Governor Cuomo has maintained he supports the policy, but would only sign the bill if it does not unintentionally expose undocumented immigrants to federal authorities.
Ayes 33, nays 29.
The bill is passed.
Cheers erupt in the Senate chambers as the Driver's License Access and Privacy Act, also known as the Green Light Bill, passes.
Today's vote helps support the promise of the American dream.
The vote followed hours of debate.
How would a county clerk know if a foreign document is real?
They're already being trained. They're already receiving funding. So this is nothing new to either DMV or county clerks.
Proponents say the bill would lower the number of uninsured people, improve safety on the road, and generate nearly $84 million in government revenues over the first 3 years. Its critics argue the legislation would circumvent federal law and encourage illegal immigration.
Your bill gives a green light to fraud, danger, and ultimately illegal immigrants voting. You'll be green lighting New York becoming a sanctuary state.
Undocumented immigrants should not fear getting pulled over and being separated from their families.
A recent poll released by Siena College showed more than 50% of New Yorkers surveyed were against allowing undocumented immigrants to get driver's licenses.
Now, this law prohibited the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles from sharing any data with the Federal Immigration Services without a court order. The law also required that the DMV notify individuals if a federal agency requested their records, and violations of the law would come with criminal penalties. Now, the Trump administration claims that these green light laws are not only illegal but unconstitutional. It says that it violates federal immigration laws, arguing that immigration enforcement depends on access to DMV records, and restricting their access obstructs federal law enforcement. The federal government also says that this unlawfully regulates the federal government by improperly restricting how federal agencies can share or use DMV information. And then the federal government says that this law only affects immigration agencies and is an unconstitutional discrimination against the federal government. Now, that's all well and good, but what are their legal arguments? Well, first, they point to the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution. See, federal law overrides state law when they conflict, and the government's arguing that the green light laws block federal immigration enforcement. And in this case, federal law should win out. The lawsuit claims that the state is also illegally regulating federal agencies by restricting how immigration services can operate within the state of New York. Now, the federal government is asking the court to rule that the green light laws are unconstitutional, and they would like a permanent injunction stopping New York from enforcing these green light laws. And they would also like the state of New York to compensate the federal government for all of their legal costs. Now, the state hasn't responded, but I'm theorizing here how I think the state's going to respond. First, they're going to point to the 10th Amendment to the Constitution. See, the 10th Amendment limits federal power over states. New York is going to argue that the federal government cannot force state agencies to provide information or assist in federal law enforcement. Now, there is a U.S. Supreme Court case that I'm assuming New York State's going to point to, called Prince v. United States. In that case, the federal government passed a law requiring that local chief law enforcement officers perform background checks on prospective handgun purchasers. Now, in this 5-4 ruling, the Supreme Court said that the states can't be compelled by the federal government to enforce federal law. even a background check. So the state of New York is going to say under Supreme Court precedent, the federal government cannot compel state officials to enforce federal law. Now, New York State is going to claim that the green light laws do not violate federal immigration law. It only restricts the DMV from sharing information with the federal government, and that the federal government is still free to obtain the information from other sources, but New York State will not be compelled to assist them. So what's the bottom line? Well, the state is going to make the argument that this is not obstruction, it's just cooperation. See, it's going to say the federal government cannot force states to actively assist in immigration enforcement, and the law does not obstruct federal enforcement, it merely declines to assist with that enforcement. Now, as legal precedent, Supreme Court ruled in 2018 in the case Murphy versus the NCAA that the state has the right to refuse to participate in any federal program, and that is what the state here is choosing to do. Now, the bottom line to all these arguments is that New York's strongest defense is the 10th Amendment protection against federal overreach. The Supreme Court has ruled multiple times that states cannot be forced to enforce federal laws. If this case hinges on whether the law obstructs federal enforcement, the court's decision can depend on how broadly it interprets obstruction versus what's meant by non-cooperation. Now, if you're someone who's trying to predict what would the Supreme Court do in this particular case, well, if we look at the Prince case, the Supreme Court's conservative majority is the one that voted for states' rights. And if you go to the Murphy case, also in a 6-3 conservative ruling, the liberals were the ones who voted against the state, while the conservatives were the ones who said the state cannot be forced to enforce federal law. Now, here's what the governor of New York said after hearing about the lawsuit.
And just a few minutes ago, we got this note from Governor Hochul. She's saying in a statement late tonight that the DOJ filed a routine civil action about a 2019 law that has been upheld in the past. She goes on to say, and we're quoting now, our current laws allow federal immigration officials to access any DMV database with a judicial warrant. But there's no way I'm letting federal agents or Elon Musk's shadowy DOGE operation get unfettered access to the personal data of any New Yorker in the DMV system, end quote.
Okay, so here's my prediction. If the court thinks that the New York law conflicts with the federal law, then the federal law is going to win. But also we have the 10th Amendment, which says the federal government can't force the state to do anything. It can't force the state to give up those records. It can ask the state for them, and the state can refuse. So with the conservative court and the legal precedent, it seems like New York has the better legal argument. But we will see, because things change all the time. Remember, Roe v. Wade was law of the land until it wasn't. So don't forget to like, share, subscribe to all the great YouTube stuff. My name is Nate the Lawyer, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.